So welcome everyone to today's webinar on faith and transforming intergenerational cycles of violence. This is hosted by Working Group 2, which is focused on faith and violence against children as part of the wider SVRI community of practice on faith and GBV. I'm Dr. Selina Palm, and I'm the chair and course lead of this working group, and I'm so delighted that you've joined us today, and I know that people are still joining. Today, we're a group of participants from around the world and also many different faith traditions. So I ask that we respect that diversity in all that we share together today. Just a few housekeeping reminders. Please keep yourself muted and feel free to introduce yourself in the chat. And please feel free to use the chat and the reactions and the Q&A to give feedback or comment respectfully on the session content as it's taking place. Don't just wait until the end. This webinar is in English, but we do have French interpretation being provided. Please just click on the interpretation box to select this. And apologies for those with other first languages. We are working on this for the future. Paula from the SVRI is running our tech today. So thanks to her and to our translators. This session is being recorded and it will be available on the SVRI website. So please keep your video off if you prefer that not to be public. So our topic today is not an abstract one. It's deeply personal. We were all children once, and we are all in some way connected into intergenerational cycles of violence as victims, survivors, perpetrators, and witnesses. We acknowledge the presence of survivors in our virtual room today, as well as on our panel, and we welcome their bravery and wisdom. We commit to make this a safe space for all who are affected by this cycle and for the ongoing healing journey that we know this requires. We also ask that as participants, you are mindful about what you share in the chat for your own journey and health and for that of others, and that you pay attention to your own triggers in the light of some of the topics being mentioned, which include child sexual abuse, and where possible, avoid giving graphic details of your own stories. Whilst we are hearing much more about the need to disrupt intergenerational harm and its impact on the lives of women and of children, and we hear a lot about the passing on of harmful social norms as a key aspect of this, we know that religious faith does not always receive much attention in these wider discussions. And that's why in our panel today, we are honing in on this specific intersection for our time together, which is just 1 hour, and we're going to jump straight into it to make the most of that time together. So we have such an exciting panel with us today, drawn from our Working Group 2 course on faith and helping children thrive, which has been such a big focus of our group in 2025. And you'll see here on the slide, our 4-person panel spans various faith traditions, geographical contexts, and professional backgrounds. And they're going to be bringing some personal reflections to us today. I really could spend such a long time introducing each of them, but because we have limited time, I want to get into what they have to say to you. So just to briefly introduce her, Marisha is a family therapist and a Christian faith leader. She's based in South Africa. She also grew up in a Hindu faith tradition and is a survivor. Tanya is a social worker with many years of experience in Portugal and the UK especially. She's also a safeguarding officer with churches across Europe and a PhD candidate. Noor is an experienced child protection practitioner in Pakistan, where he works with diverse faith leaders and faith networks across Asia. He's situated within the Islamic tradition. And Susie is an author and a survivor of child sexual abuse. Based in the USA, she works with churches within the Mormon tradition for change. She's also a theology PhD candidate. All 4 of our panelists are parents themselves and have had to grapple with what they have inherited in their own lives and what will be passed on to their children. So we're going to have 2 rounds where you'll hear from each panelist individually. The first focused on how faith can perpetuate the intergenerational cycle, and the second emphasising more how faith can be part of transforming this cycle. Please do interact with us as an audience. It makes it so much more interesting. And as I've said, use the Zoom function to type questions as we go, as we hope to have some time at the end of this hour for the panel to speak to some of the questions raised. So without further ado, I'm going to get us started. So Marisha, one of the issues that has resonated strongly in our group and activities is the idea that trauma, which is not transformed, is transmitted. And I know that you experienced this trauma as a survivor yourself, growing up in faith contexts, and the shame and silence that can come with that. Can you kick us off today by sharing a little bit about this and helping us think about how we connect to this cycle in our lives and can maybe reconnect to our own inner child? Marisha.
Thank you, Selena. Hello, everybody. So being a survivor of childhood sexual abuse meant that I had to deal with deep trauma, which at first growing up, I didn't realize how insidious this was. It was shrouded in normalization. And this was about special secrets and a special relationship, what that looked like. And when I began to understand that this is really abuse, I felt ashamed and I felt I couldn't tell anyone. My family and even the religio-cultural spaces that I was with the faith leaders hardly talked about abuse and violations. And this was also within the time of apartheid, which as a family we were also experiencing. So it did not feel safe to share what was going on. This was also a code in families and in my family that you don't really talk about these aspects. And when I think about it, it's swept under the carpet. So you don't share your stories, and what will people say? And that's the stigma of it. And I saw the effects of the trauma with myself being withdrawn, with distrusting, with building walls, with hating men, and wondering where was God in all of this. In my journey, I came to understand that I can't heal what I don't reveal. So I encourage you today to do a little bit of revealing and maybe try this reflexive exercise called Glad, Mad, Sad. It's also time for you to play, and Selena will put that exercise on the chat. So when you have some time, maybe have a look at that and try it out. So consider what formative experiences made you glad, mad, and sad. And for myself, I enjoyed spending lovely moments at the beach with my family. Mad was being told as a female, you cannot be a faith leader. It's reserved for men. And that children are to be quiet and totally silent in church. Sad was obviously the abuse that I faced. So each of these shaped myself, my behaviors, and relationships. I also share this because breaking the silence is hard, but it allows you to start a journey to deal with the trauma. And because if our trauma is not transformed, it is transferred or it's transmitted. So this also plays out in our faith spaces, where yes, there is silencing, but there's also the blame and the shaming of victims or survivors. And most of it is often misused in sacred texts to preach and teach men to be dominating and be leaders and take charge of your family and be dominating over women and children. And they must be silent. They must submit. And if you are suffering, you're called to suffer like Jesus did. And that you have to be a sacrifice as well. So this is really a harmful aspect, and this is spiritual abuse. As people of faith, we really need to interrogate this and actively prevent and respond to the harm.
Marisha, thank you so much. Just to highlight that I've placed the reflexive activity that Marisha spoke about in the chat for people to take away after this webinar and potentially do yourselves. We cannot heal what we do not reveal. Thank you, Marisha. Tanya, over to you. Your work as a family-focused social worker and church-related safeguarding officer has given you unique insights into the way in which some faith beliefs can perpetuate harmful gendered patterns that women or children can internalize. Can you share just a little bit of what you see in your work, both in the UK and Portugal, but also I know you work with projects across Africa and Asia as well? Over to you.
Yeah, thanks, Selena. So as a practicing social worker in the UK, I've observed a real lack of understanding around how religious beliefs shape people's responses to their experiences of domestic and gender-based violence, domestic abuse and gender-based violence. So this gap isn't just theoretical. It plays out in frontline practice where faith-informed experiences are often misunderstood or dismissed or even pathologized. So in fact, recent studies show that faith and religion are really inconsistently covered in social work education, with over a quarter of courses in the UK not addressing religion at all. And I want you to hold this thought for a moment because we'll circle back to this later. So in my experience in crisis and response centres across the UK and Portugal, with women who've experienced domestic abuse and gender-based violence, I've come to understand how religious beliefs intertwined with family traditions and family roles can make it even more difficult for women to leave abusive situations. So many have said they felt bound by vows of obedience or spiritual duty, and some believed even enduring violence was part of God's plan for them. So others were also pressured by faith leaders to forgive or reconcile with their abusers, or risk being ostracized by churches and their own communities, so then putting themselves and their children at further risk. So these vows then become internalized frameworks that make it incredibly difficult for women to leave these harmful situations, even when their own safety or their children's well-being is compromised. So I think religious teachings frequently cast women as the nurturer, sort of the emotional glue of the family and the guardian of children's spiritual and physical safety. But this expectation can translate into submission, not just to a partner, but to a role that may be deeply unsafe for them and their children. So I also see intergenerational normalization of violence to children caught up in these patterns. I see children deny that any family violence is actually taking place, which suggests that normalizing controlling behavior in which male dominance in the family is expected or even acceptable. So this normalization doesn't just affect the immediate safety and well-being of the children, it is also it has deep intergenerational consequences. So when children grow up internalizing power and control as part of their faith and family structure, they're more likely to replicate these dynamics in their own adult relationships or struggle to recognize it when it happens to them or others. And I guess the final aspect that I want to briefly talk about or emphasize, because I come across this quite a lot in my work, is the emphasis for young girls on virginity as the most critical issue. So I come across this sort of purity culture a lot, where young girls grow up feeling their value is intrinsically linked to their sexual abstinence and modesty. So children absorb these faith-shaped messages really early, influencing how they understand their bodies and their choices and relationships. So these beliefs aren't just abstract theological ideas, they directly affect how sexual abuse is recognized, reported, and responded to. Survivors of sexual violence feel impure or damaged, leading to a profound sense of shame and are reluctant to disclose abuse. So unless we challenge these patterns, they continue to cause harm under the guise of religion or faith.
Wow, Tanya, thank you so much. And very important that we talk about these sensitive topics, the misuse of faith beliefs and the way in which they can do harm. So over to you, Noor. You grew up in Pakistan in an Islamic religious context. So maybe can you just share a bit about your views on the impact of early childhood violence within families and religious schools, especially, I know, the issue of harsh discipline close to your heart and how this has shaped your own life. Over to you.
Thank you, Selena. Hi, everyone. So growing up as a boy child in Pakistan, discipline is oftenly framed as a way of nurturing children or a moral correction, but it has carried a deep, emotional scars on children as well. For example, many children like myself, experienced harsh words and corporal punishment both in schools and at home because of the protective measure or disciplinary measure. Because where I grew up, it was the sodomy is very, of common in that place. where children, boys are actually, are more vulnerable as compared to the girls. So, and let me tell you one thing that like I was memorizing the Holy Quran in a religious school, and I left that religious school because of the harsh disciplinary action when our religious leader used to punish us with a rubber pipe. So, and when I met that religious leader when I was doing my graduation, so like, and I told him that like this is only the one reason that I left that religious, your religious class. So I believe that upbringing, has also intergenerational impacts, where what begins as disciplinary easily becomes a cycles when the unhealed, pain of children turns into control or silence in adulthood. So many of us inherited this as a faith informed pattern, where we were told obedience was, sacred, not realizing that love and mercy are the true essence of faith. When I look from my own perspective, however, see that like it's a distortion of true Islamic values, which centers or what is called mercy, and then which we can understand as compassion today. So Quran calls mercy foundation or for forgiveness as the foundation of divine relationship. Saying my mercy encompasses all the things. Yet sometimes our practices, with children contradict that mercy. And when we repeat the harm we experienced or witnessed, earlier rather than to transform it. So I'll quote Prophet peace be upon him hadith over here that like Hazrat Muhammad Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam said that like he is not one of us who do not show mercy to our children. So I think this challenges the culture norm of harshness and discipline in child discipline. Yeah, thank you.
No, thank you so much. And for raising that issue of the vulnerability of the boy child and just sitting with that idea that obedience is sacred. And we're going to hear a little more from Susie now about this sort of sacralization of beliefs that do harm. So Susie, over to you. I know that your personal journey as a survivor gives you a profound window into how intergenerational violence operates. You experienced child sexual abuse within a family and a religious setting. And you saw these patterns shape domestic violence then within your own marriage and impact the lives of your children. Could you briefly share how these sort of doctrines or cultures within your faith system were complicit, not just in the initial abuse, but in allowing this cycle to continue?
Yes, thank you, Selena, and thank you for the other panelists as well for their comments. So my journey has revealed with painful clarity how certain doctrines and cultures in my family's faith traditions, which were the Catholic Church and the Church of Jesus Christ Latter-day Saints, they didn't just enable abuse, they became the engines driving it across the generations. So I'll share a few ways this happened from, my own experiences. First was the distortion of authority. Teachings like honor thy father and mother were twisted into mandates for silent obedience, even in the face of abuse. This positioned the abuser as beyond question. In my childhood, speaking out against my father, a respected religious leader, wasn't just dismissed, it was labeled a sin. So this pattern followed me into a marriage where doctrines of wifely submission justified control and violence. But this distortion extended beyond the personal. It's institutionalized in some churches where we're ritualized through teachings and practices not to speak out against the church itself, even when its systems or policies create harm. I was conditioned to comply at every level, turning victims like me into unwilling accomplices in our own suffering and the perpetuation of systemic abuse. So second is the culture of secrecy. And Marisha talked about this a little bit. Abuse was labeled as a private family matter, not as a social matter, as if the impact of the abuse of my father and his abusive father had no impact on wider society or the church. As a result, the burden of shame was placed on me. I was told I would cause a scandal and harm the church and my perpetrators if I spoke up. This enforced silence protected the abuser's reputation and also taught my own children a devastating lesson that pain must be buried, secrets must be kept, and perpetuating the cycle of harm. So finally, the last thing I'm going to talk about is the weaponization of forgiveness. And again, this has been addressed by the other panelists as well. So we're taught to forgive, but this was manipulated into a shield for my abusers. After my former husband had me arrested on false charges and the charges were dropped, he demanded that I forgive him, putting pictures of Christ around our house as constant reminders. Yet his abusive behaviors did not stop. So forgiveness was framed as my duty to erase consequences, trapping me in a loop of harm, to forgive, to reconcile, and then the cycle of abuse would just repeat. So this changed when I discovered Harvard professor Matt Pott's work. As a minister, he argues that if a theology of forgiveness fails victims, it can't be true. He highlights a key flaw, conflating forgiveness with reconciliation. Jesus writes in Colossians, true reconciliation is God's work, not necessarily ours on our own. And this is not just on an interpersonal level of failure of our theology of forgiveness, but this must also be considered by the church and its behaviors of harm in terms of reconciliation with victims. So true forgiveness means actual change and reform. In essence, these twisted views of authority, secrecy, and forgiveness didn't just allow abuse, they built the runway for it to continue. Thank you.
Thank you, Susie. I'm very struck by those words. If a theology of forgiveness fails victims, it can't be true. I'm just going to ask us all to take a moment to pause, to take a deep breath, to acknowledge the bravery of everybody that has shared, and to recognize that the first step for transformation is acknowledgement and of understanding of the harm. In a moment, we'll move forwards into our second part of the panel, but I just want to give us a moment in silence, 20 seconds, where we just sit with the reality of the experience of the intergenerational cycle of harm. Thank you. We're going to move now into our second round with our panel, after which we'll open up some space for interaction. Please do continue to place comments in the chat. It is a relatively short session we have together, so please do comment, react, and place any questions that you have in the chat, because we hope to have a little bit of time for engagement at the end of this second round of our panel, where we're now going to move a little bit based on the wisdom of our panel into how faith can be part of the solution and not just part of the problem. So I'm going to start again with you, Marisha, as a Christian faith leader yourself. Talk to us a little bit. What do you think children need from us to transform these cycles of violence within our families and homes? And how can faith actually help?
Thanks, Alina. So as much as we say that trauma can be transmitted, so too can healing. Oh, what a relief. So instead of cycles of violence, we could have cycles of healing. And what children really need from us is firstly self-care. You know, the concept of put on your own oxygen mask on before you put on your child's. So you do what is needed for you to be whole, for you to be healed as a person. And for a parent who's nurturing and can create a good ground for secure attachment for children to flourish. And then many faith leaders in our communities are men, and in many faith spaces and culture, it is steeped with harmful masculinities. So how can you transform those to healing ones, to positive masculinities? It starts with acknowledging that, you know, I have messed up. But also I have been messed up by harmful generational beliefs and behaviors. And then faith can be an incredible source to promote healing through rereading, through reinterpreting of our sacred texts, our songs, our stories, through the lens of liberation theologies. And through our common faith values of love, dignity, of equality, of care, compassion, justice, and mercy. So find alignment and congruence with this in our public and private lives. So our talk needs to match our walk. Why? Because children do what they see. And the children that are watching us today become the parents of tomorrow. So it's very powerful that you be that example. So if we say that we should love and respect and care, then start at home. Start with our children. They give us moments every day to show up, to live this out, to demonstrate this in tangible ways. They create the most formative experiences for us because they really test us. And we are able to then practice this patience and radical care. And then create authentic moments for connection with your children, for validation, for affirmation. Play with them and play some more. Play with your children and have fun and make memories. Faith leaders and spaces could broker this for families. They could use it to create a safe, fun, and affirming space. Even in a faith gathering, during a church service. So our homes and faith spaces can be that grounding that allows children to thrive and flourish.
Marisha, thank you so much. I'm laughing at the idea that even in a faith gathering, it's possible for us to have fun.
Absolutely, it is.
I'm excited by that. And as I listen to you, I think although we often focus on the negative and how do we stop violence and change these things, and that's important, I hear you and I think about all of the ways in which we can help children thrive. We can not just interrupt the negative cycles, but we can co-create positive cycles. So thank you so much for giving us some very practical tips on that. Tanya, I'm going to move over to you now, obviously from your position, working in social work, but also working with churches. How do you think faith can be part of the solution and not the problem? And maybe is there something that you want, theologians and faith leaders like me and Marisha to hear about reimagining God in, more gender just ways?
Yeah, thanks, Selena. Look, I think there's a really big role for faith leaders to play. I guess if they can resist being hijacked by exclusionary ideologies. And I think, there's a real danger of that at the moment in the world that we live in. But in general, I think faith leaders have a huge reach, a huge audience, and they're very trusted members of communities. So many women seek advice from them, and that translates into how they work with children as well. So they're in a powerful position to influence and deliver messages. So I think faith can be part of the solution when it becomes a space for liberation rather than control. I think it's also important to mention I'm not a theologian, but I've worked in places where communities are deeply shaped by religious beliefs and structures. And I've seen how important that is in my role as a social worker in the UK, but also in Asia and Africa. I think a key theological task today is not just to reinterpret scripture, but to reimagine how we speak about God in ways that affirm gender dignity, equality, and justice. So in my experience, dominant religious narratives have cast God overwhelmingly in masculine terms, which serves to reinforce hierarchies that enable patriarchal power structures. But the same religious text can also offer images of God as a mother, a midwife, harboring wisdom and shelter, and metaphors that speak to nurture and protection and relational strength, as well as images of God as a small, vulnerable child. So as a feminist and a mum of young children, I've really struggled with the sort of constant male imagery of God. I find it really hard to read some of these texts to my kids because I want them to see something more, something that reflects values and nurture, wisdom, women as decision makers, women being strong, when what is often seen as men in dominant positions of power, sort of reinforcing problematic masculinities. So I think it's important to bring forward female figures like Sophia and Esther and others from the Bible for the new generations in the way that Sita, for example, is positioned in Hinduism. I see this as an essential part of dismantling the old theological scaffolding that's so often been used to excuse gender-based violence, silence survivors, and demand submission from women and children under the banner of faith. In my own work in faith-based responses to gender-based violence, we've seen that faith leaders want and need guidance to effectively deliver more gendered, equitable theologies so that they don't ask women to be responsible for reconciliation and family unity, and also how to recognize and refer children of all genders for the right support. So, as I pointed out earlier with sort of training in social work and healthcare workers, religion and faith is not really a core part of their training. So they often dismiss aspects of people's lives that are really important to them due to this sort of lack of understanding. So I think it's about re-scripting the narrative, making fundamental changes to training curriculums for both groups, for faith leaders as well, because they're not necessarily equipped through their theological training, as well as service providers, and really draw out these elements and examples that reinforce female imagery and gender equality for a more equitable future. Thank you.
Anya, thank you so much. I love that idea of re-scripting the narratives. I think we can feel so terrified that we mustn't change anything in our religious traditions that we forget the enormous flexibility and ongoing process of interpretation in so many of our faith traditions. And I love those images you offered us of those alternatives within our tradition on which we can draw. Thank you so much. Noor, I'm going to come to you now as a child protection activist and as a Muslim parent. How do you personally disrupt, these faith-shaped patterns of harm that you spoke about and that you witnessed and experienced in your own childhood? And do you have some positive insights from the Islamic tradition which have guided your own parenting journey?
Yeah, thank you so much, Selena, once again. Yeah, I believe that faith can be a very powerful source of healing. The same faith once misused to justify control over children can be reclaimed as a path of gentleness, connection, and healing. For example, let me give you an example of Prophet, peace be upon him. When he was praying, he demonstrated this when he extended his prostration, which we call sujood, during the prayers, because of his grandsons, Hazrat Hassan Raziallah Ta'ala and Hazrat Hussain Raziallah Ta'ala were playing on his back, and he didn't interrupted their joy, and actually he accommodated it. So Islam, I think, also contains a powerful religious sayings, which we call hadiths, that can be reclaimed and shared. For example, like one hadith is very powerful because it reminds us that faithful living is not about controlling, but it's about compassion. This is something I have applied in my own journey as a parent, to see the parenting is not being as about to control, but it's about to compassion and connection. And something which I have used to teach other Muslim faith leaders, because I am working with mainly on faith engagement with the religious leaders and imams. Then faith can also become a tool, in reframing discipline, when we understand that the true Islamic tarbiyah, which we call it's a Arabic word, so like in English, upbringing is about nurturing, not punishing. And being a parent of two, and also bringing up, like we are living in a combined family system, so bringing up my nephews and niece, I try not to punish them, because it's my lesson learned from my childhood that if you punish a boy or a child, that will have a lifelong trauma, which create my fear and other things. So instead of using harsh discipline, I talk to them. As Marcia said, that we need to play with them, we need to engage with them. And one of the resources which I found is very useful, a toolkit of early childhood spiritual nurturing, developed by Arigato International. Luckily, I got a chance to pilot it in Pakistan, which says that the best age slots for children to learn discipline, that's from birth to 8 years. Like the first 4 are very important, then the second 4 years are very important to to nurture them and to learn them discipline. So I try to and one thing which Marisha has also said, that children are not following your words, they actually follow your behaviors and your attitude. And I encourage parents and faith leaders in my workshops to replace the fear-based obedience with the love-based accountability. And I also invite them to do their own self-work care. As Marisha said again, that like reflecting question, when did you feel safe as a child? And I actually develop a activity when I was a child, and then the participant can have it as a takeaway and do it by themselves. That like just go beyond like the to the place when we were children, what we feel, where we were feeling safe. So this activity is for you as a takeaway. And then I also believe that like faith can play an important role in contributing in community level change for children. We know that we can transform systems. We cannot transform system without transforming hearts, and our religious leaders can help us to redefine what strengths looks like. It's a challenge between mind and heart. Uh, I have been working on mind and heart methodology training as well. So like it's a not dominating on children, but we need to show compassion and mercy and justice for them. So I believe that like every time we choose listening or shouting, patience or punishment, we end a small piece of intergeneration cycle of harm. And one of the practical ways which I see as a working is to equip religious leader to talk more about the childhood of Prophet peace be upon him and how he was behaving, because he is a role model for all Muslims. So I am thinking that like to bring all the religious leader to talk about the childhood of Prophet, peace be upon him, and how he was behaving with the children. And I can leave you with a faith message that is very close to close this discussion. That Quran tells us children are the trust, amana from Allah, and not possession, but soul entrusted to our care, and protecting their dignity is a form of worship. And another hadith is also said that like children are the best gift from Allah. And our Prophet, peace be upon him, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, modeled that joy, tenderness, and emotional availability, which are qualities that can help to heal the silent wounds of generation. And I believe that like when we allow to guide discipline and mercy to guide power, we honor the prophetic model of our faith tradition. The joy of child is not a distraction from worship, but it's a reminder that how Allah wants us to be gentle, connected, and compassionate. Yeah. So Allah loves us, and we should transfer this love to our children. Yeah. Thank you.
No, wow, thank you so much. I love that idea. The joy of a child is not a distraction from worship, it is a reminder. So much to take on there. I've put that activity that Noah has suggested around when I was a child in the chat. So we're going to move on to our final panelist, Susie. So drawing on your perspective, a survivor, a parent, an advocate, and now an academic studying these issues, what do you think are the most critical and actionable changes needed within faith communities to break these cycles? And from your experience, what has been the greatest challenges in advocating for this change? Especially, I know that culture of silencing that you and Marisha both spoke about that exists in so many faith spaces. Over to you, Susie.
All right, thank you, Selena. This is a huge question. So I believe that the most critical changes must dismantle ritualized mechanisms that enforce silence and inequality. So rituals aren't just symbolic, they're potent engines that produce and naturalize social hierarchies, making gendered power feel sacred and inevitable. So scholars have shown that rituals, not laws, truly sustain these orders through embodied practices. So laws can be debated or reformed, but rituals embed spiritual authority by framing obedience as the sole path to salvation, forging a redemptive hegemony where patriarchal structures aren't just divine, but essential to everybody's eternal destiny. So challenging them risks more than community standing. It threatens your soul, your salvation. So this burden falls heaviest on women who often prioritize their family spiritual well-being over their own, while dissent is branded as, heresy or betrayal in many faith traditions. So to break these cycles, we need transformative action that honors diverse theologies and fosters gender equality. So the root driver of violence is inequality. So rituals historically created and controlled by male authorities claiming divine origin are human inventions, continually reshaped by culture, politics, and time. We can democratize and reimagine them through an inclusive lens that centers on equality, dignity, and justice. Demystifying rituals isn't a rejection of the faith. It's a profound act of liberation for everyone. So now from my own experiences, the greatest challenge in advocating for this change is indeed, as Selena and others have said, the culture of silence in faith spaces. It's ritualized, prioritizing public appearances over private truths. As a parent and a survivor of intergenerational abuse, speaking out felt like an agonizing choice. Voice my truth and risk being labeled an enemy of the faith, engendering my family's spiritual standing, or stay silent to shield them from shame and exclusion. So this isn't divine will. It's a strategy of control. But the single toughest barrier in all of this are male-to-male alliances in patriarchal structures. These bonds perpetuate the status quo, sidelining certain voices. So true sustainable change demands that reputable men of high standing step up, risking their reputations to challenge peers, amplifying marginalized stories, and modeling accountability. Without them, our advocacy echoes in isolation. Yet, okay, I'm going to talk about the hope. By building networks of solidarity, okay, which we're all doing here, right? Sharing stories, reclaiming voices, and reshaping rituals together, we can break these cycles of abuse in our religious communities. Thank you.
Wow. Susie, thank you so much. Again, the phrase that stood out to me, this isn't divine will, it's a strategy of control. And when we are able to recognize and name some of these harmful patterns, we begin the process to be able to change, transform, and reimagine them. And I feel very humbled by all of you and the ways in which you are disrupting those patterns and offering alternatives. And thank you for ending on that note of hope there. I'm very aware there are lots of comments going on in the chat. I'm also aware that everybody will no doubt want to hear a lot more from all of the panelists. All of these panelists are part of our course contributors on our course. So to hear more from them, please come join our working group and to have opportunities to go deeper on some of these topics. Susie specializes in disrupting harmful rituals in her work. So we've just tried to give you a little bit of a teaser today in just 1 hour to get you thinking. So thank you to everybody who is commenting in the chat. There is one question which I'm going to read out loud. I'm sure there are many questions in the chat, but there's one question that's been put in the question and answer. If anybody else has other questions, please place them here now, because our last 15 minutes or so will be just allowing panelists to engage a little bit with any specific questions that participants may have. So I'm going to read Charisma's question. Marisha, I know you've indicated that you would like to comment on this. If anybody else has, so I will come to you first. And if anybody else is seeing comments or things in the chat that they would also like to respond to, each one of you will have a chance to just respond briefly to what you've seen coming up. So Charisma says, I recently received a case involving a 4-year-old girl who was raped by her uncle, who was still in his second year of junior high school. She was also born from an unwanted pregnancy, very likely rape as well. But then they were married at a very young age, in just their second year of junior high. Where do we begin to break this cycle of violence? Thank you, Charisma, for such a concrete and complicated case. Marisha, I'm going to hand over to you. There should be 2 attachments already posted. You need to scroll back in the chat Those 2 activities have been posted earlier on, but I will post them again at the end of the session. Marisha, over to you.
Thank you, Krishna, for just sharing this. And just thank you for being available that this 4-year-old child could, come to the space of where it can even be reported and that you now have this case. And so firstly, to think of yourself as somebody who's already put into a break to the cycle. And I don't doubt that as well. As soon as we have people who care, the cycles of violence have more of a chance of breaking. So I just need you to know that. And I think everybody here is absolutely holding this child and this family in their thoughts and prayers. And that already starts that. The 3 things that I would say to you is, firstly, preserve life of this 4-year-old child. So safety would be the utmost thing that you look at. And it seems like that she probably is not safe. So try and see what are the multidisciplinary sectors that can get involved that would help keep her safe. And then to try and prevent the situation from getting worse would be to again reach out to people in either in the family, extended family, if it's not the family, maybe the faith space, legal, judicial, that can come alongside and help. And then how do you promote recovery is really creating those positive experiences of healing for this 4-year-old girl, whatever is in your power. But as soon as we have people who care and love and are willing to commit, the cycles of violence start to break. So just thank you for your role, and I pray for strength and wisdom as you continue.
Marisha, thank you so much. Obviously, this story brings up issues such as child marriage, an endemic issue that's often been underpinned by faith beliefs and purity culture, as Tanya has spoken about, and also the complicated issue, which we haven't really been able to address here, of child-to-child violence, where children reflect patterns that they see in the adult world around them and experience violence from other older children. I'm aware that other people may also want to speak to this, but we've got 2 other questions. So I'm going to read those 2 questions, and then I'm going to give each one of our panelists 2 minutes, and you can feel free to pick up on things from those questions, anything that you've seen in the chat, if there's something that you want to respond to, or the same case which Marisha has already shared and responded to. So Julie Johnson highlights, I'm curious if anyone can speak to coercive control in a family structure for teenagers living under it. So highlighting that liminal space of adolescence and the reality of coercive control as a form of violence. And then Deborah Priya, I may not be pronouncing that name correctly. What would you suggest to bring about more changes in respect to more concrete and effective consequences in the legal system of countries where crimes are acknowledged on paper but collectively ignored? I'm aware that Wanya is here on our call with us today, and this is one of her areas of expertise. Wanya, so if you want to put something in the chat, please do. Wanya is a lawyer in Kenya. So that connection of how do we make the legal system more effective, and what is the role of faith in that space? So those are the specific questions that have been raised, and I'm going to hand over to Tanya first, and then to Noor, then to Marisha, and then I'll end with Susie.
Yeah, I'm going to speak to the issue of coercive control. I think as a social worker, certainly practicing in the UK, so I'm going to speak to the domestic violence law in the UK, which where coercive control was recognised as a form of violence a couple of years ago. I mean, I think that one of the issues that we're up against is just the broad lack of understanding of what coercive control actually is, and how that is understood by not only sort of service providers, but certainly faith leaders as well. And then also what's actually required in order to provide evidence enough that something is perceived and understood as coercive control. And in my situation, I found that it's very cyclic, and the system itself is actually causing just as much trauma because of that lack of understanding, that inability for people to really take any concrete actions on them. So in the case that you're speaking to, of I think it was 2 teenagers living in a coercive environment, you know, the first thing is recognition that they're actually in that situation. I think that alone is a big step in part of the process, because a lot of when I have worked with women and ultimately children as well in family situations is that they don't feel believed, and that sort of form of sort of gaslighting or what is, they feel it themselves, that they start disbelieving themselves as well. So it's extremely complex. I get really
30 seconds, Tanya.
I know. I'm just, I get frustrated. Selena knows this. I get frustrated with the systems. We put these laws in place, but we're not actually able to then back them up with any qualified people in order to be able to do it, and any sort of systemic procedures that support people in this situation. So I don't know that I've come up with any sort of hope there. I'm just recognizing the complexity of it.
Tanya, thank you so much. Noor, 2 minutes from you.
Yeah, thank you so much. As Tanya have like elaborated the question and answered it very well. But like, let me give you an example from my own life that like I am I was a naughty sort of boy in my childhood. So like, and we were living in a combined or joint family system. So like, that thing is, I have faced this thing in my real life, that like we have been, grew up in a protective environment, as I said before as well, that like in our culture, so like where I grew up, it's sodomy was very, often with boys. So like we were living in an environment where it is very protected. So we actually, have this, that thing. But like, I think we need to, uh, develop some sort of guidelines, or like some to make the parenting more positive. Because like, if your parents are, realize this, that like you are facing such type of thing in your teenage, so that can be resolved just because of some of the guidance. And I think like faith leaders have the influence to disseminate this sort of issues in a broader audience. And like in the congregations of Muslims, like Jummah prayers, we have a large gathering of sermons, people who are listening the sermons. So I think it need to be discussed with the parents and caregivers. I think it can have some positive impact on our communities as well, to bring some positive change. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Marisha, I'm aware that you've already spoken to the first question, but I just want to give you a brief chance if there's anything further you want to say about any of the other points that have been raised.
Yeah, I think also to consider what damage or effects it is of the coercive control, because that's going to really help you assess, does this straight away classify as abuse? And if it is, which in many cases coercive control can be abusive, it has the same kind of symptoms. Look for those symptoms in the teenager, watch their behavior. And if it classifies as that, then you definitely have to report it, especially if you're a faith leader. Well, in certain countries, it may be different, but then you'd be a functionary, like in South Africa. If coercive control is a form of abuse, that means, it doesn't include the physical violence, but it's emotional abuse. So there's fear, there's confusion, there's a sense of powerlessness, and the effects on the teenager is seen, the patterns are there. And then so start to speak to the teenager, see if they need help. Say, this is what I've noticed. How are they feeling? And then at least leave them with places that they can reach out for help. And if you are mandated to report and you believe, then just say, can you investigate as well? So that would be important, just to differentiate what it is.
Marisha, thanks so much. And we know that boy children, as Noor was saying, can externalize behavior and then can encounter the system in a sense as problem children. So just, I think, equipping parents, and Noor, as you said, parents turn to their faith leaders over and over again. We know this is true. So an incredibly powerful role that faith leaders can say if they are equipped to help parents think about positive parenting, and a very important strategy. Susie, I'm going to end with you.
Okay, I have a lot I could say here. I'm a little confused about what I should address, but I'm going to say a couple things. I want to say, first of all systems failed me. Every system possible has failed me, whether it was the legal system through going through the courts, the church systems, they have all failed me. Okay. Coercive control. This is one of the things that is really, really important. Faith leaders aren't trained, especially on DARVO, which is deny, attack, and reverse a victim offender. And they are not educated on this. So my perpetrators were very savvy and articulate and really righteous guys, held positions in the church. And I was this traumatized person, wife, child. And when you're traumatized, your narrative comes out fragmented, it's disjointed, you're crying, you're emotional, you're a mess, and they look at you like, get out of here. Like, and they believe the man over you. And so that if you're not trauma informed, that's really gonna affect how you read these stories or read what happens. You're going to say, well, she's guilty. She's guilty. She can't even communicate in a clear way. And so coercive control, I'm going to share a couple examples. When I was going through my divorce, our church leaders were helping try to mitigate the harm because there was a lot of harm. It took it took me 10 years to get out of my marriage, but once we filed, it took 3 years for me to get out. This is how complicated it was. And so my church leader, one of them, was helping us. And there was such control on everything, the finances, how much I was a stay-at-home mom for 26 years, the money that I was receiving to feed my children, clothe my children, and that kept getting chipped away, and he could control how much he would give me, and that in turn hurt my children. So the intergenerational trauma, like, it wasn't just about me, but it was about, and in the Justice Center, when we went to finalize our divorce, I asked, will there be any justice? And my attorney said, no, there will be no justice for you. And I'm in the United States. I'm a stay-at-home mom, and it was really painful, extremely painful. He controlled all the finances. He could hire a big attorney and get, all of these things. Although God helped me, he turned it around. I was always had my faith in the divine, always. And he did turn it around, and he helped me and my children. And there was a kickback, although it didn't compensate for all of the abuse. So coercive control is a big deal within faith institutions and with legal systems, all the systems. And I'll just close there because I'll start crying or get way too emotional. Thank you.
Susie, thank you so much for your bravery in making this personal, of helping us understand how this is real in people's lives and in the lives of their children. I'm struck when listening to you earlier that we don't only experience coercive control within our families, but we experience it within our religious institutions. We've heard a lot about the culture of secrecy and silence and shame. And I think we have to own up, we have to confess in a way in our faith institutions, the ways in which we are also seeking to coercively control survivors and victims. And we have to do better, we have to do differently, and there are ways for us to do that. And I just want to say a huge thanks to our panel. You have articulated so much for us in such a short amount of time. To all of those particularly who are brave enough to bring their personal experiences, and to all of you who commented in the chat and engaged and interacted and suggested resources. I also want to thank our tech and translation team so much for holding this space for us, and to thank all of those who are watching this recording at a later date. This recording will go public on the SVRI website, so please do circulate it to those who you feel need to hear what is being said. And then finally, I want us to hold, as we wrap up our session today and move out into the wider world, I want us to hold all of those who have been victims or survivors of this vicious, intergenerational cycle of abuse and violence. May you be a torch to help light our path for a different kind of faith community and be the voice that motivates us to say that this is possible and it must happen. Thank you, everyone, and a special thank you to our panel today. I know some people are asking for attachments. Those are not attachments that I have access to, so please contact directly the person who is sharing resources. And thank you, everyone. Have a blessed day.
Bye, everyone. Thank you.